For today's conversation, we are so happy to be joined by Dr. Swati Narayan. Swati Narayan is an academic, activist, and author. She is currently a visiting faculty at the National Law School of India University, NLS, Bengaluru. Her debut nonfiction book is called Unequal: Why India Lags Behind Its Neighbours. Her research articles on NREGA have been published in Gender and Development and the Indian Journal of Labour Economics. Thank you so much for joining us, Swati. We also have with us Sudarsana Kundu. Sudarsana is the Managing Trustee of Gender at Work India. She is passionate about supporting institutions, both within the private and public sector, to drive gender equality agendas. Over the last 2 decades, she has advised several organizations, including UN agencies, to evaluate and assess the impact of their workplace policies and practices. Thank you so much to both of you for joining, and thank you to everyone who tuned in on a Thursday afternoon. Over to you, Sudarshana.
Thanks so much, Shambhavi, for this introduction to Circle Back. We're so excited to actually start off again with Swati today on such an important topic. Women in economy and women's labor force participation is such a critical topic, especially when it comes to India. One of the things that we're doing right now is actually spotlighting on Beijing Platform for Action and looking at a 30-year review of its, implementation of the last 30 years. And women in economy is a critical part of that review process. Women's labor force participation has so much, we've had so much of conversation. And, whenever we speak to a certain segment of the population, especially in the corporate sector, there's a lot of talk about women in C-suite, women in leadership. Overall, what, Swati, would you talk about when you look at women's labor force participation? What are the broad trends within India, and has that shifted, changed? In what ways has it changed over the last few years?
Thanks so much, Sudarshana, for inviting me and Shambhavi. It's really nice to see a unique organization and also the participants who joined in from everywhere. So to answer your question, I think though we planned this a long time back, in the last 2-3 weeks, this has been the most topical issue, right? With rape in Calcutta, with the Hema Committee report coming from Kerala, the fact that women are not safe in workplaces in India, across workplaces. So if you ask me the trend, it's before the pandemic, for nearly 10 to 20 years, there was a declining women's workforce participation. And this oddly at a time when the country was seeing very good economic growth rates. So we were one of the few countries which were having this strange phenomena of fall in labor force participation of women, while the rest of the economy was booming. And this is the trend, and I wish people are aware of this. So this was still the pandemic. After the pandemic, there's been a bit of an improvement, and we've sort of improved. But what is improvement? It's 33%. So we have 70% of women in India who don't work, who are in effect not earning money. Not that they don't work, they work at home, they work outside the home, but they don't get paid for their work and therefore are economically dependent on men.
Swati, you bring a very important point, saying this is paid labor force participation that we're talking about. The unpaid care work largely rests with women in India, and a significant part, in comparison to men, it's almost like a 5:1 ratio, right, in terms of the unpaid care work versus what men do versus what women do, right? But when it comes to paid labor force participation, where are you seeing, from your research, what are some of the barriers you're seeing for women's labor force participation rate, especially maybe in rural areas? What do you think that's the cause?
Well, I think in rural areas, some of the issues transcend. We are an extremely patriarchal society, and safety for women at the workplace in urban, in rural areas is the biggest concern in India. And this includes both traveling to your place of work, at the place of work, The other issue, which is enormous, is that across urban-rural areas, we see a huge gender pay gap. In agricultural wages, you see it. And therefore, women are at the bottom end of the labor market. The type of jobs that they also end up taking are the ones with low wages. The other issues are the fact that in our economy right now, we are a construction-led growth economy. Manufacturing has tapered, but where are the jobs for women in construction? They're extreme. In the UK, for example, they have a commission which looks at creating work which is suitable for women. And in India, there are no such attempts which are being made, which is why it is at 33%. And I think the other thing which is very important in the rural context is that across India, 80% of jobs are in the informal sector. So these are jobs which have no security of contract. And therefore, additional features like having maternity benefit, support for young children as creches, etc., don't necessarily exist. So across the board in rural and urban areas, the issues more or less are the same, that it is an unfriendly environment for women and absolutely not catered for women in any way. But primary importance is you will step out of your house when you know that it's safe. And this is then used as an excuse to prevent women from stepping out of the house. And also, of course, in the Indian context, patriarchy is so acute that it begins before birth. And it is used as an excuse that if a family has economic prosperity, then it's better for women, especially the bahu, to stay back at home to increase the family's prestige. So this is a very ironical situation in which we are, where women are encouraged not to work.
So it's actually in the name of women's honor and women's safety that we control women, right? And kind of decide on their body, on their right to choose, choice for marriage, and right to work, all of those, right? In such a condition where the social norms work so unfavorably against women, what are the things that one can do? And you write so in terms of your research, you kind of brought light to government policies and schemes, right? And both in terms of comparison with other countries in South Asia, but of course in terms of looking at what's happening within India itself, you've talked of government policy and schemes. What can or what is being done? And in that light, and we really want to kind of talk about your research and delve into it in terms of the NREGA provisions. What has been sort of the impact of NREGA on female labor force participation?
Right. So in this very bleak situation where we live in this extremely patriarchal society, if the family is not able to support, and in a very caste-based society, graded inequality in every way, then it's incumbent on the government to do something. And NREGA is one of those few bright rays of hope where sort of unexpectedly, it has become a feminized program with greater participation of women. So it was not designed as a women-only program, but we have majority of women working in it. So I think perhaps since today's conversation is focused on NREGA, perhaps I can show the presentation that I have prepared now to take this conversation forward. Can I try and do that, Sudarsana? Yeah. So that I can have statistics at my fingertips.
Sure. Please go ahead and share.
So today, if we just focus on this one small aspect, which is on National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and what role has it played for women's labor force participation in rural areas and also the urban variant of it. So we are living in a situation where India really is at rock bottom in terms of these composite gender indices. On this global gender gap index, we are 134 years away from parity, if at all we ever reach it, which is at least 3 generations away. And women earn 40 rupees for every 100 rupees a men earn. On this other composite index, which is done by the UNDP, called the Human Development Inequality Index or the Gender Inequality Index. India ranks 134 out of 193 countries on the HDI, and gender disparities persist and have been persisting for a long time. But because these composite indices are devised in different ways, I prefer to use individual indicators. And in South Asia, we see that whether it's life expectancy, female life expectancy in terms of health, or female literacy, or labor force participation, India lags behind most of the countries in our neighborhood, with the exception of Pakistan. Political participation also. It is with great difficulty. It's almost like we're invisibilized in our society. And with great difficulty are we able to come forward and lead fulfilling lives. The other aspect is we keep thinking of India as a superpower, right? Vishwaguru sometimes. But if we compare with the other developing countries, the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, and China, we find that in terms of women's participation in the labor force, we're almost half that of China. So China is around in the 60%, which itself is a decline. And India is now, with a post-pandemic slight improvement, we're at 33%. Brazil and Russia are far ahead of us as developing countries. So there's something extraordinarily odd about Indian women sitting at home and being encouraged to sit at home. So then this brings me to the one ray of hope, which is NREGA, which since the inception of the program, which is before 2001 data that I've presented, has had more women as a majority. So now we, I'm not able to, So now you have 59% of women working in completing the person days of work in NREGA. So it's a family gets 100 days of work, and women end up doing most of this work and therefore earning the money for it. As many of you would know, what the guarantees that NREGA provides are every family in rural India can apply for and get a job card. And based on this job card, 100 days of work are guaranteed for any family. But for this, you have to ask for work in the season in which you want work with a written application to your local Gram Panchayat. Okay. And then 15 din ke andar, within 15 days, you have to be given work within 5 kilometers of your village. And usually these are group applications with 50 odd laborers applying together. Also, there are some provisions that on the work site, you not only need water, but a creche for children, first aid box. So you're supposed to get work within 15 days and get paid for this work within 15 days. And if you don't get work within 15 days, you have to get an unemployment allowance. And if none of these things happen, you can file a complaint or participate in a social audit. Now, for a strange variety of reasons, NREGA has proved to be beneficial for women, and women are interested in participating. One is this idea of a group work application. So because we are in such an unsafe society, when a lot of women apply to work together in the same premise, they're far more likely to do that. Second is receive work within the closed perimeter of the village. Also, the fact that sometimes one woman is kept to take care of all the children under a shade as a creche. And strangely, one of the challenges of NREGA is that in 17 out of 21 states, the wages are below minimum wages. So this is unbelievable for a government program. It should not be like this. But because of this, because the wages are so less, women are taking up this work. And men are going out in the marketplace to work and get higher wages, which makes logical economic sense for a family. But then again, it's another way of exploitation of women. Also, because now it's a women, I believe that because it's a women majority program now, wages are delayed, there's no unemployment provided, allowance provided, oftentimes work is not provided because women are not treated well in our society. And off lately, the latest thing that we're fighting against is mass deletion of job cards. And of course, there's this persistent problem of corruption. in such a scenario, what we find is NREGA still is a ray of hope, despite the fact that it gets only 0.25% of India's GDP. It has generated in the last year alone 3,000 million person days of work. Now, usually the guarantee is for 600 days of work, and the average that's running in the country is 52 days, and Kerala is one of the best states, which has 68 days. But what is really interesting is there are 16 million households in rural India working on NREGA. This is more than the Chinese army and I think the Russian army put in together. And despite that we have such a large peaceful army working to improve rural areas, we rarely have any coverage on it in, let's say, in the media or in conversations in urban spaces. The other sad part is of the 100 days guarantee, only 8% of households complete 100 days, Kerala being an exception with a 33% completion rate. So because Kerala has been performing well, I've been looking a lot at Kerala and why women work so well in Kerala, and NREGA has been a success there. So in this graph, what I've done is on the left-hand side, you have rural female workforce participation being extremely low in the 20s to 40% across India. And in the Hindi heartland belt, which is Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and also strangely Haryana, it is in the 0 to 20% range. Exceptionally, you find when we look at NREGA map, is that 80 to 100% of NREGA person days are done by women in the two southern states of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So there is something very odd going on. Women don't want to work in the workplace, but in NREGA, they're very keen to work. Or rather, it may be the other way around, that they're pushed out of the market workplace, but NREGA as a government program is far more welcoming of women. So to look at this a little bit further in terms of this puzzle, which seems to be a southern trait of the southern states being far more, having greater participation of women. And of course, this also has to do with the legacy of the women's movements, the anti-caste movements in southern India, especially in Kerala and Tamil Nadu. But across the southern states, we also find that women's literacy is higher, women's empowerment is higher across parameters. So the strange thing is, why does NREGA work so well in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, which have high literacy? Because this is a program where you're supposed to dig earth, not employ that much, or the perception is you don't employ educated skills, you do unskilled labor work. So this is really an exception. And to find out a little more about this, I realized that the main reason Kerala in particular does well, Tamil Nadu is an urbanized state, so there is a different parameter working there. But in Kerala, one reason is that NREGA has partnered with NRLM, which is the National Rural Livelihood Mission, another government program, which in Kerala is called Kudumbashree, which started, I think, 25 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And here you have a photograph of 4 women who, under NRLM, have taken a bank loan of 2 lakhs. And then they're working on growing paddy on this land and vegetables and getting NREGA work of 100 days guaranteed. So they earn something, there's 30,000 rupees that they're going to get through NREGA every year. And then they go and sell the paddy also in the market. So it is creating not only employment for them, but also generating revenue. And so that they can pay back their loan. And apparently this partnership between NREGA and NRLM has been so successful in Kerala that it has spread across the state. The reason is the Panchayati Raj institutions in Kerala have 3 tiers. At the habitat level, there is the self-help groups or neighborhood groups, which then become area development society and community development society. And all of them are heavily involved in NREGA and being the bridge with the Panchayat. So the NHGs identify the work to be done in the village. They submit village level applications. And all the mates and the supervisors are taken from the ADS committees, who then distribute job card applications. And the labor budget is prepared by the CDS. So this umbrella network of self-help groups are supporting NREGA work simultaneously, and the office bearers are often the same people. So they're encouraging more women to participate in this program. And this is not a small number of women. We're talking about 4.5 million women in these Kudumbashree units who are now enrolled also in NREGM. Some photographs of the unique forms of group activity that they've started. So one is collective farming and then selling the farm produce. The other that we have is also working and creating Anganwadis as wonderful spaces for children, creating nurseries, re-cleaning and improving waterways. Also, a lot of the cleaning activity after the floods in Kerala were done by women with NREGA work money. And I have seen even on the seashore, in very fallow land, they're trying to grow vegetables and if not sell it in the market, use it for their own consumption. So it's extremely innovative in terms of the activities that women have started doing. And one reason is that there are 4.6 million Kudumbashree members, which is half of the household in Kerala are now part of this Kudumbashree network. And they bridge the gap, as I said earlier, with the panchayats, because Kerala has a very low density of panchayat functionaries. The other thing is now NREGA has mandated that all the mates in Kerala who are the supervisors, so it is an educated person's job to fill the register, to do attendance. So all of this is taken up by educated women in the village. And this is an incentive for them to join into NREGA. Is getting done. So Kerala is the only state where women, all the NREGA supervisors are women and they're educated women from the Kudumbashree networks. The other very interesting thing is now 40,000 small collectives of women have started farming on fallow land that they've been given of 10 million acres of fallow land. And in the Ernakulam district, with this Green Friend program, NREGA, they've started doing organic farming without the use of any pesticides. And this is just some examples of the many innovative ways in which women have started employing and using NREGA and the linkage with NRLM. The one that I found particularly important was that Kerala is an aging society because of high life expectancy, especially of women. So a lot of the elderly women end up being widows or single women. And NREGA ends up being the last resort for them to gain some amount of money if they don't have pensions. So the government in 2021 has given a very important policy measure, which is to ensure that all NREGA workers in Kerala get pension when they reach 60 years of age. A lot of these elderly women also then work on work sites if they want to supplement that pension income. But during the pandemic, for safety reasons, the government has capped it at 75 years. Nobody older than 75 years should work on an NREGA work site, but oftentimes you have younger women helping them to finish the work, and I've often seen that. Lastly, just to sort of also conclude about the urban areas, so the Ayankali Urban Employment Guarantee Scheme, and yesterday was the anniversary, also gives 100 days of work, though it's not a law, if I'm not mistaken. It's just a scheme with a daily wage of around 300 rupees, which is better than most other places. And educated women are then taken as apprentices in private enterprises and paid money through the AUEGS. Also, the other partnership they've done is AUEGS with Gramin Awas Yojana. So you get 4 lakh rupees to build your own house, and then you get NREGA money to build that house with the other people who participate in the program. And there are 1.5 lakh women who are active in this, and 90% of them are women in this scheme also. The other thing I wanted to take is also some good examples from across India, because, let's look at all the positive examples. I'm now in Karnataka, and everybody's talking about this Kosina Mane creches, which is constructed for NREGA workers as a permanent establishment to help them to work on the work sites. So this is very interesting. Another very good example is in Tamil Nadu. You have the solid waste management workers. My pronunciation is not very good. Tumai Kavalers. So not only are they, and I've seen this in different cities, not only are they segregating waste, then creating organic manure from it, and selling the organic manure. And this is so wonderful because it's environmentally sustainable. The women are getting their wages paid half through NREGA and half through solid waste management budget. And this is crying for replication all over the country. In fact, the center had said that they would replicate it, in which case self-help groups across the country could then participate in this. But it has not been replicated yet. So there are good examples across the country of how we can improve women's participation. And I think there are two things that are required for policy measures: remove gender intensive barriers, and NREGA has to pay minimum wages. Just because there are greater participation of women, you can't continue to exploit women. Wages need to be paid on time. There are delays year on year, and the permissible works can be expanded to make it more gender sensitive. And then in terms of gender exclusive worksite creches, and this unique partnership of NREGA with NRLM and other government programs can be expanded. So I think there's a massive potential for 67 million women who are now in 6 million self-help groups across the country to participate in some form or the other with NREGA and get their guaranteed 100 days of work. With this, I'd like to say, if you need more information, go to these government websites, but most of all, please join the NREGA Sangharsh Morcha, which is fighting for rights of all NREGA workers, especially women. So I hope that wraps up most of your questions, Sudarshana.
Thanks so much, Swati. This was such an insightful presentation. So, one of the things you started off by saying is that FLFP in the southern states was, and there's a difference between the NREGA participation rate and the FLFP participation rate. Now that NREGA has kind of picked up in these states, are you seeing any impact on FLFP in either the southern states or elsewhere? And like, what contribution is the NREGA participation having on the overall female labor force participation rate?
Right. So I had kept these statistics for you. But I have to say this is murky waters because I don't know how the government decides this FLFP rate. They keep changing the definition. And the ILO estimates, in fact, for other countries also I've seen, Nepal is sometimes 80%, sometimes they pull it down to 29%. So it's not very clean. But I've seen two estimates. One, which I saw in the newspaper, which said that from 2017-18 to 2022-23, rural women's workforce participation due to NREGA has increased from 18% to 30%. Okay, so there's almost more than 10% increase. Another ADB, Asian Development Bank statistics said it increased from 25% to 37%, which I think is an overestimate. But all of them seem to say, yes, NREGA has contributed. We may not know the exact contribution, but I feel there's also massive untapped potential. It shows that if you have group work where women feel safe, if there are creches created, gender-sensitive work created, women are more than happy to work outside the home and contribute to the family income. So, and even otherwise, we know that NREGA work, the demand far outstrips the supply. Yeah.
Again, in terms of gender-sensitive work, right, Swati? I mean, this is a key issue, right? Not only in India, of course. India, it's pretty stark, but elsewhere as well. One, there is occupational segregation. Women get, and that occupational segregation, as you said, in NREGA leads to the fact that the low-paid women are always stuck in this low-paid jobs, right? And then there is this thing about these kinds of jobs are for women, these jobs are not for women, and then you also have that you can't those jobs that are actually women prefer to do are not part of the schemes also, right? You don't even kind of include them because sometimes you don't even think them as productive work, or you don't even. So what are some of the things that you are seeing which you feel, as you said, in terms of a recommendation, is to expand the ambit of, jobs that can be included in NREGA. What are some of those that you think can be included?
So I think that if the heavy, intensive construction-led work can be diluted to a certain extent, i.e., a lot of that work requires both men and women to work together. But also, I think that a lot of the works permissible should not be determined in a centralized manner. They should be decided. The idea of the law was always that they should be, within a large parameter of, let's say, reducing floods or drought proofing, etc. The idea was should be left to the villages. But now what's happening is it is the government bureaucracy that is deciding the type of works to be done. So, for example, works like tree planting or any idea which in that particular area, for example, I said solid waste management, etc. But I would rather that the gender sensitive works be determined at a localized level rather than us determining it at a. What can be gender sensitive is to ensure, and I've seen this, for example, in Telangana and Andhra, is that there is a creche. One woman is always given the job of taking care of the children, shade is provided, water is provided, and that there's also specific work for educated women in areas where there's high female literacy. So I think for Kerala to say that all supervised mates, which is a job of getting people together, putting the work application, to give that all to educated women is a fantastic idea in the Kerala context. But in fact, even, think in the bureaucracy, how many women are in charge of NREGA, right? So it sort of dilutes after you grow to the Gram Panchayat level in Kerala.
Yeah. No, I mean, go ahead, Swati.
I just wanted to say, I think all our participants also, we have them from so many different places. They themselves would have so many ideas.
Yeah, we'll get to them in a couple of minutes. One thing that, in some sense that Kerala is kind of turning around and kind of challenging the stereotype of supervisors, because when we worked in Uttar Pradesh on NREGA, we actually we were working with women's groups, small women's groups, right? To actually pilot this concept that women can also be supervisors, because it was so against the grain to kind of think that women can actually do a technical job. And it's not that technical as well. It's considered technical, but it's really about measuring, kind of writing, recording, as you said, some of those. So even that is considered technical, and that's also kind of considered beyond the remit of what women should be doing, right? It's kind of the men's purview of doing some of that. And that brings me to this issue about because we had such a fantastic experience of working with local women's groups, women's collectives, those which actually were already kind of mobilizing women, and therefore had these, like Kudum Mishri, but not in that sense, but had these women's collectives or women workers groups already working with them, and were therefore able to kind of make that connect with the NREGA scheme, and taking them, getting them the job card, making sure that they had then access to work sites, became mates, all of those, and had to kind of also encourage them to do that, because women are not encouraged to actually get into workforce. What do you think that civil society or women's rights groups can do to leverage what's happening within NREGA?
I think NREGA is one of those laws which came into being only thanks to civil society and the labor movement fighting for it for good 20 years. So the implementation of the law, etc., even in an unfriendly environment right now, because let's be honest, the government is not interested in putting money into NREGA. It is only in the pandemic that it realized how invaluable this was as a safety net for people to survive in times of crisis. So it would require continuous monitoring, motivation, support by civil society in every single state. Now I was also thinking of, for example, and there are such wonderful civil society organizations, whether community-based organizations. So in Gujarat, there's Anandi, for example, which helps women to become masons to construct toilets. And, if there's any one woman sensitive issue where women have a greater stake in ensuring that they're built and used is a toilet. So similarly, I think across the country, if CBOs were to look at this partnership between NREGA on its own or with NRLM, self-help groups, which civil studies anyway is so heavily invested in, to improve women's workforce participation. I think that's something that's not been done and can be done with 67 million women already on their ranks. At every step, from monitoring to implementation. But most of all, I was just thinking about this in the context of also, let's say, the HEMA committee report or what's happened in Kerala. Women are unsafe everywhere, right? And it's, you're not even paying women minimum wages, let alone having a POSH Act or an ICC in an NREJ worksite. So I think the bare minimum dignity that we can ensure is that women are paid minimum wages, they're paid on time without delays. And if there are more women in NREJ, inadvertently or otherwise, that this program be celebrated for that, and that the benchmark is not set so low. Because I'm really, so fed up with the women, with government speaking about women's empowerment when there's nothing concrete on the ground.
Aren't we all, Swati?
Yeah, right now.
Right now, we are quite, everybody's kind of in that state. But we have a lot of young people today on this call who are possibly not as fed up, or who are beacons of hope, who will possibly be able to take this forward. We'd love to open it up to questions from this young group. So, Shambhavi, can we have some questions from?
We do have a question from Khushbu. They say it's a hypothetical question. What will happen to these women if the government scraps the scheme?
They will all be protesting. All 60 million households, not just women. So I don't think it's so easy to scrap a law, which is precisely why so many years were spent to make it a law. Because governments change or fall, a law is, something that's quite difficult to remove. So I don't think we should look at such a dire situation at all. The only thing we need to focus and concentrate our energies on is how to make this law implemented in letter and spirit, which is not happening right now.
We have another question from Sonakshi. Sonakshi, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Right. Thanks, Shambhavi. And thanks, Swati and Sudarsana, for this conversation. Actually, the permissible works discussion is actually very pertinent, because I also find myself wondering if this then can become the opportunity to at least, ensure minimum wage for already feminized sectors of work. Say, even within agriculture or within construction, there are certain jobs that women end up doing. But like you said, the wages for that are despicable. My question was that you did bring up the slight increase in labor force participation rate post-pandemic. So one piece of analysis that had come from some quarters then is that, part of the reason that happened is because a lot of the male breadwinners in many households lost their jobs during the pandemic, which kind of almost had to force these erstwhile homemakers to come out and resume jobs or take up jobs. And secondly, or almost as a parallel or consequence of that, again, what happened was that these jobs were taken up in very precarious conditions and at dismal wages. I was wondering if any such trends came up in your research as well, and if you were able to figure anything to support or contradict this.
Absolutely, Sonakshi. So what you said is perfectly true. I just want to supplement that with saying my research was actually before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, there was this phenomena of, instead of a recession, they called it a she-cession, because women lost jobs. Many women stayed back at home to take care of children. And the impact on women's work was far greater in India and world over than men's work. But after the pandemic, world over, we are seeing that women are taking up, as you said, more precarious jobs just to help the family float. So it is not an ideal situation. It is not sustainable. And we need to see whether this is going to continue or. But at the same time, I was also hoping that there would be a change in gender norms in this unique situation where men and women were suddenly stuck at home for a prolonged period of time during the lockdown. And I remember writing an article called No Country for Women and getting a lot of flack for it. But what we see now is really, India is a country where it's extremely hard to even survive as a woman, let alone thrive. So I do hope, I mean, I'm always filled with hope that what if this spurt that we're seeing in women's participation, for example, during the world wars, when men were fighting on the battlefield, women took up male jobs in factory floors. So whenever these huge societal changes happen, there is a change in gender norms for whatever reason. So let's see whether this has a larger impact in society or not.
Right. No, that's something to think about. Thanks, Swati.
Thanks.
Yeah. And partly, Swati, I'm sure you've seen this as well, right? In terms of the gender norms, there was a spurt of domestic violence that actually increased because of during COVID years, right? Because that people were stuck together. Again, not India specific, across, the UN Women data shows that it was pretty much global, and India as well, I remember we had a helpline list of helplines to go to, all of that we were circulating at that point because that was the case. And since you're in academia, one of the other things that we saw was that research levels kind of amongst academic women in academia actually reduced because they just didn't have time to really write and publish, right? So that kind of really had a very impact of their career actually taking a backseat for a few years just during those COVID years didn't again impact men in the same years. So even though they were in the same place, I know there's been some change, not saying that there hasn't been some change amongst men who've started becoming a little bit more sensitive to the housework that women do, but that's really in seems like in very small quarters, at least based on sort of the emerging data that we've all seen, right? And hopefully there's more, but as of now, we're not seeing that as yet. Any other questions? Would love to take a few more.
All right. So I'll just repeat the question that Shreya has put in the chat box. She asks, how do you see the technology seeping into NREGA and its implementation? Say the online attendance system and the ABPS, the general concerns that raises when we talk about helping or not helping women's participation in NREGA.
I'm in Bangalore right now, and people love to say that technology is a solution for everything, which is quite unrealistic for a program in a rural area. Even in the outskirts of Bangalore, you barely have good have good internet connection. You're talking about getting, attendance. So overall, I think this attendance program for all workers has been quite disruptive. And it's not just attendance program in this new ABPS. The government likes to experiment using technology on programs, on various social security programs, time and again. Even the simple thing of previously, in many places, wages were paid in cash. Now they're in bank accounts. But to navigate, to get to a bank, to ensure that it is paid in the right bank account for women to withdraw that money in rural areas, and if you look at data, for example, rural women, elderly women, are far more likely to be illiterate. And this program is a works program to do physical manual labor, and to expect these people to be literate, to expect them to ensure that that one mate puts their attendance, and now they've even said attendance 2 times a day. It is so irrational and insensitive. And I really wish a lot of government decision making across the spectrum on all issues, would be done in the location where they're supposed to be implemented, for example, for children's program to be done in schools or Anganwadis. If it's NREGA, go to a work site, see how impractical or practical your technology solutions are. So overall, I would say it is disempowering rather than empowering the laborers. And it does not take a genius to understand that, because this is a rural works program. Uh, so technology is not the solution to reduce corruption, and the laborers are not the one who are cheating. You have the best technology applications on the NREGA website. It is one of the most information heavy website. But the thing is, why don't people analyze that website and use the data which is already on it to see whether money is going to the bank accounts of real laborers or false laborers? That is a far better use of technology than imposing more and more new variations of technology. On top of that, they need Aadhaar linkage now of the bank account. Every step of the way, you're making harder for people who are supposed to get less than minimum wages to get even that. It is bizarre. And really, the real thing is not about the technology. It is about the huge class differences, the caste differences, the gender differences, which is resulting in all of this extreme level of insensitivity. Because you don't care. You getting your governmental salary on time. I mean, you as in, administrators. So yeah. So I don't think ABPS helps to answer your question. Sorry.
That's, and those who are wanting to read more about sort of the Aadhaar, and Sonakshi talked about the mismanagement of electronic database systems. You can also look at Ritika Khera's work where she talks of Aadhaar as a uniquely Indian dystopia, and talks about the challenges that laborers face, not only women but poor laborers face in actually accessing jobs, accessing social security schemes that are actually meant for them because of sort of these linkages and electronic systems that are being now imposed on them. We have somebody who's actually somebody has a question on wants to make a comment. Meera.
Yeah.
Meera, do you want to? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to continue the same conversation that you had now. See, this is going to be a very dismal picture. I work with Adivasi farmers and women farmers from scheduled communities. They pawn their job cards. Most of them, the upper caste people, take it away, and they don't have any way to get it back. And it gets accumulated, and there is the so-called social audit doesn't work there. And even if people are willing to voice out, there is nobody who's going to support them. I think we are desperate to see that women get some income, very, very decent income, and work in a place where they can get some money home. NREGS is not always, helpful in certain circumstances. I think we need to make a voice. We need to raise a voice to see how we can protect the most vulnerable ones, like HIV positive women, migrant women, and the women who are really on the margins. I think this works a little better for people who are better off than the people whom I have mentioned. So we should see how we can help these women. Thank you. This is a comment that I really wanted to tell you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Meera.
Thanks.
I fully agree with you.
I think, Meera, what you're saying, it's a slew of solutions, right? That this is not just one. This has been really helpful and instrumental in certain segments, but we have to kind of think about other such solutions as well and tailor it to the local context, right? That's kind of what we're hearing from you. Bono has a question. Bono, do you want to unmute yourself?
So, hi, Swati. There are like lot of, yes, there are in the problem in India is that we can, don't get anything done properly, so just putting it that way. What I found interesting is that in the Kerala, the good example is that, that there are so many things that the women are doing, like, for example, making a creche or like the kitchen garden idea, which are things that women anyway do as part of their unpaid work, and now if they're getting paid for that kind of work through NREGA, then that creates like I was thinking of, there is an opportunity for talking about, or when we were also talking about, creating work that women could do, whereas, not to make it mandatory that only women will have to do the care work. But there is also, I thought that there is an opportunity for care work to be paid through, this program. So I just wanted to know if there is any conversation going on around this, research, or what are your thoughts on that?
Thanks so much for the question and for meeting each other. So I actually also want to get back to Mira's point. While there could be programs, for example, people who are HIV positive or have tuberculosis, and those who are absolutely at the margins, some able to work, some not able to work, these would be necessarily targeted programs. But one of the good things I've seen of NREGA is that it is a universal program open to anybody. And in terms of economics, it's the employer of the last resort. And it's designed to be such. So in fact, it's quite harrowing, but I've seen an 8-month pregnant woman on an NREGA website. Her husband abandoned her and she's like, this is the only way I can get money. So there are some situations in which you can't necessarily target things. And like you said, government programs are often so leaky or have faulty targeting. So having a universal safety net is helpful, but as all of us agree, it cannot be at such low wages, and the wages need to be paid on time and be sensitive to women. Now, in terms of your wonderful question of how do we expand the works and can it include care work? Absolutely, I think so. And in Kerala, there's also this parallel initiative called palliative care, which one of my students is working on, which has become a big movement to help those also who are suffering from chronic ailments. So it is not just care for children, but also care for the elderly and those who are differently abled. So can all of this come under NREG work? Perhaps. Only worry is this issue of skilled and unskilled work. If the wages remain as low as they are, then I'm worried that if we put in skilled work into it at such low wages, then we're undermining skills. But what is good, for example, in the solid waste management in Tamil Nadu is they get NREG wages plus wages from another program. So it is a higher level of wages. But all of these negotiations have to happen ideally at a state level or at a local level based on. So there's a massive potential for expansion.
Thank you. Yes, I do think that. And the question also of that, if this is a program which is working or has the potential of working and is already working for so many women, then also to that the next step, not just remaining is that last resort, but actually creating employment, last resort of employment or at such low, talking what you already said, like talking about minimum wage, talking about different levels of work, which is localized and which is, designed to the women's needs, things like that. So that's definitely there is scope for that.
There is scope for that. But at the same time, in terms of economics, you don't want to take away work that can be generated in, for example, in the marketplace or the private sector. So government work can expand. So, for example, even work of, say, Anganwadi helper workers who themselves are not paid, are not recognized as workers and not paid well, right? So the scope for expansion certainly exists, but not that government work should be everything in terms of skills, So this requires extensive conversations, expansion, and there is a proposal also for creating a women's employment guarantee program. There are several such, either only in urban areas or urban and rural, etc.
Thank you.
Quickly take two final questions since we're running out of time. One question is from Arushi, who asks, do you believe more skilled jobs can or should be incorporated within NREGA, considering how we face the issue of feminization of low-paid and unskilled jobs, especially in areas or states where NREGA has already made progress in gaining larger participation, for example, in Kerala?
Right. So I have more or less answered this question, both in terms of the danger of including too many skilled jobs, and at the same time, some skilled jobs actually would benefit as long as they're paid higher. Also, in terms of feminization, usually I'm not particularly thrilled when a particular profession, let's say nursing, or let's say in Bangladesh, working in what do you call it, ready-made garment industry,
Factories.
yeah, has become a feminized profession, because that's another word for exploitation. Sometimes, or let's say even teaching, but that ultimately ends up being low respect work, or Anganwadi workers. And so in general, I'm not always thrilled about it, but given the fact that we're at such a low level, given the fact that women have to fight in India for every workplace to be safe, group work, and that is why women in Kerala who in normal agriculture are not working, despite the huge gender gap between the wages which is available in the marketplace versus the wages which are available in NREGA, which is much lower, they're still taking up collective farming. So it is a feminization out of circumstances. Maybe if we create a skilled program only directed at women in a state, then that could be a way forward to see how this experiment works. So it's an idea, yes.
Thanks, Swati. There's Bharti's question. Bharti, do you want to unmute?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yes, so we currently got this economic survey, and where it was written that since the economy is improving, and that's why the government has decreased the funding for NREGA, and if any such like pandemic or anything comes, they will improve again. But I don't think this is the case, because somewhere I also got the report that unemployment is also increasing. So it's not very clear that whether the government is hiding something, or what is the actual picture. If you can throw some light on that. Thank you.
Sure. You yourself have spoken about it with a lot of skepticism. So the economic survey is sort of projecting a picture, which so we have independent data saying that we have a 45-year high of unemployment. And on the other hand, the economic survey is focusing only on the economy and growth without speaking of inequality within India and how most of this growth is getting cornered by the rich. So there is a huge mismatch, and even government data right now, either there's a lack of data or there's a lack of reliability of data. Also, let's also be honest, I think a lot of social programs world over, whether it's healthcare in the US or in any other country, social programs have become increasingly politicized programs, where you'll have one particular political party or one ideology supporting certain programs and another supporting a different type of programs. They've also become huge vote bank sort of politics associated with it. So I think we should also look at the political economy of what is behind certain pronouncements of different governments. And filter that. This is obviously, as I said, it's an unfriendly environment for increasing NREGA expenditure. We've known that for more than a decade now. So in that context, and secondly, one last thing I wanted to say is that NREGA was designed as a demand-driven program. It was not supposed to be that the government decides the budget. Whatever is the demand on the ground, the government was supposed to fulfill. Okay. Unfortunately, what has happened is the budget allocated by the finance ministry is determining how much work, and there's a rationing of work. There's a quota of work now. And many researchers have spoken about how this is discouraging, creating a discouraged worker effect amongst NREGA workers. Because you apply for work, you don't get work, and you don't get unemployment allowance. And the government hides the fact that you applied for work and that perhaps the demand for NREGA could be 3 times, 5 times higher than the actual. And I've seen this in reality. You put work applications and you don't get work. So yeah, be skeptical as you are.
Sure, thank you.
Isn't it true, Swati, that there was a lot more scaling back, and they had to, because of such high demand, they had to, especially during COVID years, they had to actually then go back on what they had said. There is absolutely no demand for an NREGA, that they had to kind of actually take back those words. Even though there is rationing, they've had to still scale it up from what they had originally planned to
Because the
set those.
distress in the rural economy is so acute.
There's a lot of discussion around that, but Shambhavi is reminding us that
Totally,
we're
and I need
almost
to
at
run.
the end of this session. This has been such an interesting session, and so pertinent to the topic that we are all. I mean, it is, of course, there's women's safety, something that's, I think, on the forefront. Everybody's thinking around it. We need to kind of actually take those to more structural discussions, more systemic things, and really start assessing, seeking accountability, looking at policies and schemes, and saying, what's working, what can we do to scale up. How can we actually question what's happening at central levels, but also in our respective states? Because there's a lot that we can also do at our state levels as well. And participation of both civil society, from what you're saying, Swati, in terms of is critical. And anybody who's more interested should look at the NREGA Sangharsh Morcha and really see where we can actually kind of contribute and how we can work together, especially the ones who are sitting in women's groups, students. We can all think about how we can come together. So this has been such an enriching session. Swati, thank you so much for taking your time and talking to all of us. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Shambhavi.
No, thanks a lot for summarizing that, Sudarshana. I feel this conversation really draws attention to what the requirement for an increased buy-in is, not just from civil society, but also on a policy framework level, because opportunities or programs which are engaging more women in group work or employment are fairly rare. And, like Swati mentioned, it's difficult to gauge and gather whether the participation rates are reflecting that adequately or not. So once again, I would like to thank Swati for sharing data-driven insights and also really unpacking the context of NREGA and how it's currently operating. Thank you to Sudarshana for your insights as well. Would love to just thank the attendees for all their insightful questions and inputs. We really appreciate you all joining us. And I also would love to thank Preeti and Atul for seamlessly interpreting the session as we went along. So with that, we're closing today's session, and you can send any comments or suggestions to the email ID that I've placed in the chat box. And for any updates about Circle Back or about Gender at Work India, you can look at our socials and our website. And thank you so much for tuning in today, and we'll see you next month with a new theme and a new guest. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks so much, Preeti and Atul. Lovely having you both, as always. You're great.